You know that we had to come back around and do it again. We already got Alco out the way, and now this time around we're coming back with Mr. Hands-On, Mr. Show Me Where the Money At. And I do mean that literally. This man is about his paper. We got the profile for Soujuurou. We have went over this many times before, but Soujuurou is essentially the prototype Kazuki, the same Kazuki that teaches at Homonohara in Stay Night, Medea's master. They share a similar background in the sense that they both came from these villages where they were taught these secret techniques, Kazuki taking this as far as to become an assassin, and because they spent their entire lifetime being so drawn into their craft, you can see that other aspects in their character like charisma or certain hobbies is fleeting. As a matter of fact, if you look at Soujurou's original design, he actually looks a lot like Kazuki and resembles a bit of his older self in FGO. So starting us off here, a country boy who left his life in the remote mountains and descended into the modern era, a metaphorical time traveler, while trying to acclimate to the excesses of the city despite his ordinary background and unsophisticated disposition. This unlucky part-timer came across a battle between mages. Well, magecraft is not that different from the things in the city, he thought. That's the mindset of the man who came to live in the same house as the magician Alco and the witch Alice. One may well call his optimism unrelenting. So when it comes to his upbringing, the village that he comes from is located way out in the mountains, away from society altogether, and that's all he's ever known. They hardly had contact with anybody. As a matter of fact, it's said that they would only have meetups around once a month, and the meetups would be with other villagers. So even in the contact that he had, he wouldn't be seeing anything that's out of the ordinary. It would just be other people of the same ilk. Of course, they didn't have electricity. He comes to the city, he doesn't know what a phone is, he doesn't know about politics, he treats everybody the same regardless of what sex you are. There's a lot of things that he needs to understand about being a person altogether. With him living this lifestyle as basically a human stripped of all of their characteristics, which in that case we just revert to our primal instincts, basically living like an animal. Didn't even know what a school was. So it's funny to see him coming down to the same school as Alco, and she's the one that has to usher him in and take all of this in as if it were something easy to process, especially with somebody being her age. That's very abnormal. He gets into school and he thinks the classroom is a one-on-one tutoring session. That's just how much out of the know he truly is. And as I brought up before, this unique perspective that he has throws Alco out of the loop because she's thinking you have to be kidding. But at the same time, and you know she'll never admit it, you can tell that she has a lot of empathy for his situation simply because she's kind of walking the same shoes in a different way. By the time that she gets into the school, she's starting to take up the lifestyle of a magus, which just like Soujuurou is something that was for the most part unfamiliar to her. So the same way that she's learning about being a magus, he's learning about being a human, learning about society, and they kind of bridge the gap with these two things between their characters. The whole reason that Soujuurou comes down from the mountains, and this kind of works into the lore of the world itself, is that he came into contact with an event that made him wake up, that made him value how precious life was. It's almost like an AI becoming self-aware. At first it was just survival, it's just these primal instincts, and he never says what the event is. And that's why Mihoyo 2 has always been so desired, because there's still a lot left to unpack. He never says what it is. He's living his life focused on survival and these primal instincts, and once he realizes that there's a world beyond that, he told himself that he had to get out of there, and he came down to the city. And the thing is, he never really had a problem with the lifestyle that he was living because he was so used to it. Now he's in a hard place where he can't go back to the lifestyle that he used to live because he's experienced the city, but he's also very alienated among the people that he's around in the city because he's lived that way up until this point, and you can't reverse that. They can tell him everything that they know, but he is what he is. There's really not too many of his kind, and that's why when he has conversations with Father Ari, who works under the church, it kind of struck a chord with him the most, because you can tell that he's one of the people that really gets it. As far as him being this part-timer, well, that's where that comes from. When he came down to the city, he had to find a new way to survive, so he gets a job and just a standard to the ground job at a Chinese restaurant in order to keep up the apartment that he had while he attended the school. He actually tried to get 3 jobs and they wouldn't let him because the student council restricts your employment to 1, which he felt the way about. Stop gatekeeping the bread. A defender of the risk-free tactic of keeping quiet about his beliefs. Not special, but not exactly normal either. You get off into Bond 2, an inconspicuous facilitator, an ordinary man who managed to keep away from mage-leaning subjects despite living in the same house as Alco and Alice. Impressive layman. Perhaps due to his upbringing, maxed out on the nature aspect, he feels like a fish out of the world despite not having any particularly unique characteristics. He seems to lack an identity, but in reality, he has a solid ego that he simply doesn't care about. He doesn't place himself as the most important person. His strong point is getting along with almost anyone due to having a friendly personality despite not talking much. He's good at regular, mundane exercises that test his physical capabilities. And so to get into the Alco and Alice aspect, what happened there is when Alco and Alice were out at night performing magecraft where nobody was supposed to see them because of the bounded field, Soujuurou ended up seeing them. And now that he has become a witness of what went down, they have all arranged an agreement where he has to stay at the mansion with Alco and Alice, that being Alice's mansion to be exact. Huge mansion, by the way. And guess where they put my boy? In the attic. What type of room and board is this? So that's how they all ended up together, and Alco was already there learning under Alice anyway because she had been inducted into the mage lifestyle, and the Awazakis were already friends with Alice's family to begin with. So that just went hand in hand. The idea of him not having an identity is definitely a ruse. It's more so of an uncommon identity, especially among people of his age where they're learning, they're exploring the world, and they're trying different things. And so in reality, at this point, everybody's finding out new things about themselves. Problem is, with him, most of these traditional things don't necessarily pique his interest as much. So when he gives his angle to things, it's always going to be something different. You get over into Bond 3. Although the definition of normality is a very subjective topic, everyone considers his personality normal by their inconsistent standards. He disapproves of inequality, preaches harmony, wishes every day to be enjoyable, and has honest and ordinary standards of good and evil. He's unassertive, lacking in desire for attention, and not very sociable. Nevertheless, he's not decadent or misanthropic either. He's passive but responds in good faith when someone does interact with him. The reason why the quiet Soujuurou is probably that as a listener in casual conversation, he's more sincere about the subject than the speaker. Because Soujuurou doesn't know how to interact with people, his escape valve is trying to take everything seriously. This never gets uncomfortable because he has zero will to pressure anyone. His serious, honest, and weirdly cozy presence propels the speaker in a positive direction, resulting in people liking him. People meeting him for the first time tend to appraise him as the very picture of harmlessness, and Alco makes an appalled face every time she hears this comment. Yet following the root of this transition, everything is a walking lesson for him. Anytime that they're faced with danger, Alco points out the fact of how calm that he remains. Things like the puppet, for example. But through his eyes, it's hard to be taken aback by something like Toko's puppet when the concept of a city itself is magical. The idea of these cars and buildings, all this architecture is magical because technically they're not supposed to be there. And so in his mind, he treats that all the same, which leads to him having not only a greater will, but higher perseverance. He only lets you know what he wants you to know, as evident with conversations between pretty much anybody that he has, but especially Alco and Father Airy. And it's funny, the idea of somebody saying that he's harmless, knowing his background when he can really put them on a t-shirt if he really wanted to, just off of the way he was raised. He is in fact really good at facilitating relationships, one of those being Hosuke. Hosuke being one of the characters on more of the support side of Witch on the Holy Night, so that's why you don't hear much about him, but he is one of the students that worked the same job as Soujuurou, and he was one of the first people that Soujuurou met. Once again, you know that he's been living with Alco and Alice, and they can teach him a lot of things, but they can't teach him certain things. They also can't teach him how to be a man. So he's taking a lot of things that Hosuke says at face value. And Hosuke isn't the worst person in the world, but he does have some degenerate values that could rub somebody in the wrong way. One of those, for instance, is the conversation that he had with Soujuurou about money and how money can buy you happiness, but it also won't desert you before somebody else will. Soujuurou takes this to heart, so it ends up becoming an entire arc of his character where he's just walking around asking people about money. This dude is in the church asking people about money. That's what I mean. There's just certain things that you don't do, and it's so hilarious. And that's why I brought up before that he's about his paper, because that played a pivotal part in some of the things that he did in the story. How he viewed certain things, and as a high school student that has to pay all of his expenses but not being able to get the proper jobs that he wants, he's already looking at those conversations like something that feel really head on the nail to him. I mean, Hosuke is the same dude that was talking about getting his porn stash found that he had stuffed in the ceiling. It's like, first of all, why do you have porn in the ceiling? Like it's some dope. Hosuke talking like they about to run some canines through that bitch. Dude, nobody cares that much. Second of all, why do you have magazines to begin with? That's how you know this is old. This dude's still using magazines like we're riding around in carriages. So like I said, there's some good things to take, but not all. And speaking to the money element, this comes full circle when Soujuurou ends up getting paid under the table by an elderly woman just for him being around, just for coming to visit her. Like paid a ton of money, the equivalent of working actual jobs. He didn't realize what she was doing at the time, and also how it would be a problem on a moral perspective. Soujuurou is just looking at it like he's just doing a good thing, when the reality is the woman's family didn't visit her, and so with her being up in age, she just wanted somebody to be around. So all of that came back around. And I'm seeing in FGO that the timing of Soujuurou as a servant is a little bit after the events of Witch on the Holy Night, and he's actually working for Toby now, who is the vice president, which is really dope considering their relationship. Getting into Bond 4, Presence Concealment A. He's not exactly trying to hide, but he's so inconspicuous that people genuinely never see him approaching. It's impressive how he blends in wherever he is. Knowledge of the Sawa Sea, form is emptiness and emptiness is form. His lifestyle is spontaneously evasive, even though no one taught him to be like this. And even back in his old village, he speaks on it as more of a every man for themselves situation. He did have acquaintances as far as the people living there with him, but he never really regarded anybody as close in particular, especially not nearly as close as somebody like Alco and Alice. Good luck chant EX. Basic hypnosis magecraft cast by someone somewhere, somewhen, to undo his sense of fear. It doesn't have any effect because the hypnosis failed, but that was a significant interaction nonetheless. This skill name is fake. Wait, what? This skill name is fake. The proper name of the skill was weapon concealment. Negates fear, confusion, and skill seal. Okay, I'm seeing it now. These skills are just anything. With these Mihoyo characters, I mean, because after seeing Alco have that protagonist EX, I'm actually done. And this is pretty much the same thing. Definitely banking this to be interventions from Alco and Alice, because just going through his animations, you do see that they help him out in the midst of battle. So it's not unrealistic for him to have a skill that does the same thing as well. You have Mushi, Fasatsu, Hinro at an A rank. The Buddhist vow meaning, in my pilgrimage, I shall see no death and commit no killing. Treat thy neighbor's death as nothing and kill not thine own life until thy mission be fulfilled. The bare minimum requirement needed to live in the harsh nature away from civilization. His risk avoidance and optimization of routes to complete tasks were elevated into an everyday habit. And see, this is interesting. This kill not thine own life until thy mission be fulfilled. Because I specifically recall that it was a thing that the quote-unquote event that Soujuurou came in contact with was him possibly entertaining the idea of deleting himself, which would make a lot of sense because he's seen people die. He's seen people leave the village and not come back. And he said this out his own mouth and he thought nothing of it. So if that didn't do it, then it had to be something closer to home. And the fact that they brought this back up in the skill kind of makes me feel like this is a subtle way of them saying that's what we were going for. There's also other things like the conversation that he had with Father Eri, where he flat out asked Soujuurou would he do that to himself, but Eri didn't even know. He was just making an analogy. Eri just said it out the blue, but it's more so as if he's speaking for Soujuurou, because when he asked him the real reason why he came to the town, he couldn't tell him. An event like that would definitely make you realize there's more to life than just living in the mountains, if it can be helped. Then you have Shakutenrin Jizai Zaifuza, the Buddhist vow meaning I shall borrow the will of Chakravartin to take lotus position wherever, a surge in mental strength at moments of peril, a boost to his abilities caused by mental activity, specifically the vigor and willpower that comes with having a defined objective. The ultimate vital principle, the I must accomplish this before I die, is something normally utilized only once, and he's the living example of what happens when that's utilized constantly. A further point of note, this whittles away his invisible force of fortuity, but for those capable of accepting being discarded after being used, what can't be seen might as well not exist. And to piggyback off of the last skill, he has no problem throwing himself to the dam as long as he feels like it's for a good cause. Even in the face of his life being threatened, he rationalizes the situation as, well, all I can do is the best I can do, so I'm not gonna make it any more than that. If you look at his final ascension, which points things like this out in greater detail, the wraps around his neck are supposed to be yet another allusion to that self-deleting route. And also you have the scars on his arm, which come from a time that he was attacked by wild dogs. You know, he's in the village, they can only heal things the best they can, so the scars remain. As a part of his training and just surviving out there in general, he's dealing with dogs, he's dealing with wolves, he's dealing with bears. That was just a normal thing for them. You get into Bond 5, that is a lot of pluses. C rank, coordinates unknown, and the rest is blocked out. Lands one unavoidable blow. The more unfair nonsense there is to the opponent's defenses, the more the unrealistic attack they suffer becomes impossible to perceive, adapt, decipher. Allegedly. The allegedly is important. The only ones who know what happened and how it happened are the man driven to that choice and his owner. Wow. So basically this dude is the hard counter to anybody with conceptual defense. This skill basically says we don't give a fuck what type of defense you got. As a matter of fact, the better your defense is conceptually, you're screwed. That's actually so beautiful. I'm already seeing people say the stronger his opponent's defense is just makes his pimp hand stronger. Spoken like a true poet, I gotta give it to him. This is something that comes from Soujuurou's fight with Luke Beowulf in his werewolf form, the Mihoyo version, who was in fact a subordinate of Toko, whereas a means to protect everybody else on the scene, Soujuurou actually risked his life. And you have to keep in mind that Soujuurou has no powers at all. So he goes into a fight with Beowulf with just balls of steel, and he kills Beowulf as a human. This man literally busted his arm open to land the first blow, ignored the pain, and spun around to knock him with his elbow on the second. And that's why Nasu mentioned that Soujuurou was the strongest protagonist by normal standards in all of Type Moon. And Soujuurou coming to the city actually made him weaker because he was so attuned with nature. He had this unearthly potency about him. Coming to the city actually nerfed him. So he was actually stronger when he was out in the woods before this fight. When it comes to being normal, being of the vein of maybe a Sasuke or a Grand Hassan, he's the best to do it because he doesn't have a legend, he doesn't have a sword, he doesn't have any of that. Just grade A do you dirty. And of course after that, Alco uses the fifth magic 2 to reverse time before that happened, so his body was restored, but that was the initial scenario. Then we have his Bond CE classic, which is a dish that he whipped up himself mid-story. An original recipe for an individual dish. Every man living alone develops at least one unique superpower like this. It started as the staff meal at the Chinese restaurant Soujuurou worked at, but it later evolved into his specialty. It's fried udon with a lot of additional ingredients, but thanks to its thorough seasoning, the flavor is rich and consistent, packing enough of a hidden punch to knock out his two roommates who depended on the high quality of the ingredients to make a decent meal. On a day without any special occasion, he naturally and smoothly offers you this proof of affection. And so this is his offering to Ritsuka, the Soujuurou special. So this is when Soujuurou decides decided to whip up some meals for him and his people at the mansion. He said, you know what, I got this. The man goes into the kitchen, cooks some noodles and throws anything on top of it and calls it gourmet. Gordon Ramsay could never, and that is what you call a special. Safe to say that Alice was disgusted. And we also have a translation note. All 3 vowels used as the names of Soujurou's 3 active skills are completely made up by Nasu. The vowel used as the name of his not yet explained 3rd skill, Hyakotsu, meaning I shall train in 1,000 pagodas for 1,000,000 years to learn 100 tricks. Hopefully if you knew nothing about Soujuroux, you at least come out with something. I seen people coming on Alco's profile trying to downplay Soujuroux. I'm like, what? Hating on Soujuroux? When we started doing that? We gotta start disowning some of these dudes, cause that's not it. We do not claim him. The Type Moon fandom would like to make a trade, cause hell no. Anyway, Soujuroux on top, Mr. Capitalism has spoken.